And let me go over to YouTube. And we are live. Good morning, anyone who is already tuned in. And we're just going to small talk for a little bit. I'm Skylar Thomas, independent filmmaker. This is Jack Gescheit of the Tree Spirit Project. You wear many hats. Do you have a succinct title that you've decided on?
For this podcast, I'm Jack Gescheit, founder of the Tree Spirit Project, just as you said. I'm also not in my role here because I'm going to use more profanity than they would like, I think, but I'm very pleased to say I'm a consultant, a Tule consultant, particularly for in defense of animals, an animal protection group for, about 3 years now. I met doing work in the park for the elk. So they're a great organization to work for. I really like the people, but sometimes I like to be a little bit more lone wolf, wild gun. That's not the right expression. Let's keep guns out of it, but Tree Spirit for now.
Tule Elk Consultant is your new title.
Right. One of them, yes.
It sounds very impressive.
It sounds very impressive, doesn't it? Hard to believe I don't even have a college degree, let alone a master's or a PhD.
You don't have a college degree at all?
Drop out twice.
Oh, I've got to end this call. Sorry.
You know, someday you and I are going to have a public chat here about degrees and their value. And the thing I like to say, and of course I freely admit this, is as someone who dropped out of a state school and dropped out of New York University, I've met so many highly intelligent people and accomplished people from, well, let's start with Woody Allen, although, you know, leaving out the pederasty, who just kind of overachieved because they didn't have a college degree. And of course, I've met, you know, many people from, you know, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, wherever, who are just very, very hardworking, and they can be dedicated in a certain area, but kind of, you know, morons in some other areas. And well, I know you encountered this.
Julie Phillips is in the waiting room, and she's going to join us in a little bit. And she is a very experienced person working with the Tule elk, a Tule elk biologist, 30 plus years in California, following Tule elk up and down the California coast, as they are naturally meant to do, moving around, not being confined into quite a shockingly small area, as a matter of fact. And she's going to provide some very interesting insights that few people can on the Tule elk situation, not just in Point Reyes, but in California, and the implications for the very survival of the Tule elk species. And as we did some introductions before people arrived onto the show. I'm Skylar Thomas, an independent filmmaker.
And I'm Jack Gescheit of the Tree Spirit Project.
Jack, you are going to fill us in on the details of an interesting course of events. The Park Service did, in fact, begin taking the fence down, and then they came to an immediate halt as soon as the ranchers said stop, via a court injunction. And you have personally, I think that tells you a lot when they stop on a dime. just at the fact that the ranchers were pursuing an injunction and not at the judge's decision. But we'll get into that more. Can you tell us what went down? You listened in on that hearing.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to this, actually, and even our different take on this in a conversation for the audience. Yeah. You and I sometimes talk beforehand, as people do, and kind of what do we want to cover. In this case, I intentionally didn't initiate that because last week, today is Tuesday the 10th. Last week, Monday, December 2nd, began the week that was quite the dramatic week after, you know, you and I have been involved in this for years, you a year ahead of me, but Monday, December 3rd, Park Service, I'm just checking my notes here. It's so much happened so quickly. I actually wrote it down to make sure I get it right. Announced their final decision in a year-plus long NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act, and they issued the final decision for Tomales Point, which is the elk reserve, and that accompanied a FONSI, a finding of no significant impact if the fence were to come down. Would releasing wild elk back into the rest of the park do, you know, incalculable or major ecological damage? No, it would not. at that Fonzie. It did not require a statement, a much more extensive study of what would happen with elk out. And I mention that because it's pertinent to what happened with the Cattlemen's Association. So anyway, that was Monday. Tuesday, 7 a.m., not 24 hours after the 1:15 p.m. Monday announcement, the Park Service was out there taking down the fence. I mean, we were all wondering, oh, when will it happen? Mm-hmm. I was being like you, cynical, based on experience self. When are they going to do this? The very day, December 4th, they continued the work. Starting around 12:30 or 1, lunchtime, as it were. And that's actually when I showed up out there. And we don't know why they stopped. They just stopped. So we're all guessing and all. And it turned out they stopped because the California Cattlemen's Association, or as I call it, the California Cattlemen's Association, the CCA, filed a lawsuit in SF District Court, basically requesting a TRO, a temporary restraining order, which in my layman's terms is like a cease and desist. And I think that's what you had an opinion about. Did you want to say something there before I continue, or should I continue?
Well, let's consider how long. Let's consider the lawsuit that you and I were plaintiffs on, trying to get emergency help for the elk, and that this was tied up in court for years. And this was supposed to provide immediate relief for elk that were dying in horrible conditions, and that got drug out for years. And
so just let me let's tease this out as we're doing here. This is good. Yeah. So there's actually 3 lawsuits at the moment, all still open. Yeah. There's the one that was first chronologically was what I call the Harvard lawsuit, brought by the wonderful Harvard Animal Law and Policy Center out of Cambridge. You were originally a plaintiff in that. I still remain a plaintiff in that. Laura Sheraton, a third plaintiff, and the ALDF, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, are plaintiffs in that suit, and it has not been closed out. And I would posit that that is the case that had the most direct influence on this whole situation, with the fence coming down at Tomales Point, because they did a TPAP, a Tomales Point area plan, with what to do about the elk and the situation that there with elk dying, which you were one of the first people, you and Matthew, the photographer, reporting on. So the Harvard suit has worked its magic. Obviously, it's maddeningly too long, over 3 years. But in my opinion, my humble opinion, the Park Service never comes out and says, we're doing this because of this lawsuit. They wouldn't do that in most cases. But I think that was the major influencer for it. In addition, months later, what I call the 3 orgs suit went underway, which is Western Watersheds Project, Resource Renewal Institute, Center for Biological Diversity, filed suit. It was basically a follow-up on their earlier suit from 2016. And that one is now coming up on 3 years also. And that, though, focuses, again, in layman's terms, on the ranch lands and the damage that cattle do in the pastoral zone, which is the, rancher apocalypse area, which is to say they destroy the land. Second lawsuit.
There's a detail in here that I'm sure you're going to comment on, but it's pretty noteworthy that the Park Service would say no significant impact, when the ranchers themselves have been using the excuse of these elk are going to drive us out of business all these years. Remember, everyone, these are the wildlife friendly ranchers. Everybody, the people that support these ranchers play both sides. They're like, oh, you can't have the wildlife. These are hardworking Americans just trying to get by. And then you say, well, look what they're doing to nature. Then they say, oh, but they're wildlife friendly. They live in harmony with the wildlife.
Excellent point, Schuyler. Just to emphasize that, it's not just the pot calling the kettle black. It's way worse than that. It's the cancer of the cattle industry calling elk a harm, black on the land, a blight on the land. They're the major, number one source at Point Reyes Seashore, the cattle industry, of land degradation, water contamination, and air pollution, period. More so than 1.5 million visitor vehicles spewing tailpipe emissions every year. Cattle industry puts out more greenhouse gases, GHGs, than all those tailpipes in that park combined. And how dare they complain about a few more wild elk walking around their land, which isn't their land anyway, they're just renting.
What you just said is difficult for people to hear. And I just want for the people listening who are getting upset to understand that I get where you're coming from. because we've all been indoctrinated and want to believe the fairy tale that we started out with, but it just isn't true. They are the number one source of every problem out there. And not just via normal ranching activities, but egregious violations of their leases and dumping. And so I don't want to, okay, I'll spiral out of control about everything that the ranchers have done. But,
right.
but amongst the other things, they've said that they complain about the elk being on their land or eating some of the food that they want for the cattle, or eating any of the grass that they want the cattle only to have. And what really, never once, even though the Park Service was willing to buy into that, never once. And I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for this, asking the Park Service to say, did you ever do a study? Did you ever go out and observe what the elk are doing to these ranchers before you agreed to go out and kill them under the guise of Johne's disease testing?
See, it's tricky, Skyward. There's two players, as you know, here, which is the National Park Service, and then there's the cattle industry. And, you know, what's so interesting, as I've been contemplating what's happened this last week, and now I want to consider the Park Service our ally. There's many good people in that agency that want to do the right thing, but they have really yeah, exactly. They've caved to political pressure. And
that's not a good person.
And for you, you're extremely judgmental about it, and I understand it, and you have righteous anger about it. For me, I'm choosing to play more of a politician's role and sort of understanding their motivations, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that's ancient history. The Park Service, in my opinion now, I'm curious what you think, is now our ally. They've come out with a decision to change their regulations to say, we want the fence down, and we're going to put up with the ranchers screaming bloody murder, or as we're going to get to, last week, filing a third lawsuit now at play in the park. The Cattlemen's Association saying, oh, no, you don't, Park Service. How dare you do an environmental study and say that elk can be on the land? We challenge you. We want you to not take down the fence, which you started doing, put it back. And as they said in the court hearing, which made my jaw drop, is we also want you to remove, I keep using air quotes because remove is an Orwellian term, 88 elk that are in miscellaneous, thousands of acres of ranch land, because they wander in and out from the other herds, not just occasionally through a hole in the fence reserve. And the judge,
Jack,
God bless her, put the kibosh on it.
As I said last week, I wish you were right, and I've always been right in these pessimistic situations. You're touching on my greatest fear, because this idea that it's ridiculous that they would actually round up the elk and try and reconfine them, unfortunately, isn't that ridiculous, because we have FOIA documents showing that both ranchers and the Park Service have hazed the elk and chased them off of ranch land and chased them into barbed wire fencing and hit them with vehicles. And we've had helicopters shoot axis deer whenever people decided that they wanted to get rid of something. How many elk died darting them for the contraception experiment that they did, or were injured? How many elk died testing for Johne's disease? All you have to do is apply an excuse to it and not call it intentional eradication. I can't imagine the damage that will be done to those elk in the effort to try and re-herd them. But the fact that these people would even say something that disgusting disturbs me. And a teaser for people that are waiting to hear Julie Phillips. Julie Phillips is going to let you in on the sad state of Tule elk in California, and how the Tule elk populations roaming free in Point Reyes National Seashore should have much larger populations if they were in fact being allowed to reproduce naturally. So these are things you should tuck away in the back of your mind and be quite concerned about. Right.
The fenced compound is basically a lethal management technique at Point Reyes Seashore. Anyway, so may I go to the good news? And I want to see, you and I play let's see, I guess bad cop and badder cop. So let's see.
Wait. I'll stop one thing, because
sure.
You talked about the fence as a lethal measure, because we have the massive die-offs from animals who can't get to better conditions in order to survive. But in the free roaming herds, some mysterious things are happening. Some of them aren't mysterious. We know, in fact, that actions have been taken against some of the free roaming herds to get them away from ranch lands.
Meaning ranchers go out and illegally haze. Well, it's tricky, but haze them away. We don't want elk on our land to go out there and hazing is moving your arms or chasing them with ATVs. It can be minor or it can be major or even lethal.
If you look at the correspondence that the FOIA documents revealed, the ranchers actually call upon the Park Service to assist them in that hazing. So it's not just the ranchers by themselves.
Correct.
So, but we have the Drake's Beach herd and the
Limontor, Muddy Hollow area herd.
And something's going on there. And Home Ranch their place is decorated with the skulls of elk, which should probably disturb people also. But for some reason, it's not just, I just want people to be clear that it's not just the elk behind the fence who have the die-offs. The free roaming elk also have a mysteriously small population, or maybe not. Maybe we'll learn something different today when we talk to Julie, but that's my understanding.
Well, and basically, good morning, Derek, and good morning, Leah, if I didn't miss you, and good morning, Sledge, who is out in the field here and reporting in. So thanks everyone for tuning in. And you'll like this, Skylar. I don't say there are any free roaming herds at Point Reyes Seashore
because they can't leave Point Reyes.
Because it's not even that; it's that they border ranch lands, and this is people tune in to hear about the Tule elk, and I'm involved in this issue because of the magnificent Tule elk. The more time you spend out there with them, the more you appreciate them and love their presence and their majesty. The word I keep coming up with, or keep using as everybody else does, but you realize that from firsthand experience, and I first learned it from your wonderful film, which I still recommend every time we have this show, which is The Shame of Point Reyes, a 90-minute documentary. It shows you the video with Skylar's work of what's going on and the diametrically opposed land use that wild elk represent and commercial cattle operations, including small, local, organic, certified, hardworking rancher. That whole mythology is still the cattle industry, and they still abuse the land. And in fact, right now, literally, the Cattlemen's Association is suing the Park Service to force wild elk to be contained again behind a fence. They cannot coexist.
And you had a great point that I want to elaborate on, that even in the free roaming area, that place is just filled with fencing, barbed wire fencing, electric fencing, anti-wildlife fencing, not wildlife friendly fencing that's way too high and has the terrible barbed wire in it. It's habitat fragmentation. And George Werthner opened my eyes to how damaging habitat fragmentation is to the natural life cycle of wildlife. We look at it, we've seen fencing so much that we hardly even, or at least I used to. I just, the way I grew up, that's just what land looks like. You have barbed wire fencing. It's almost as if it springs out of the soil. It's so common.
We have a romance with it. The cowboy riding the range and mending fences and all that. There's songs about it. You grow up as a little kid. Anyway, George Werthner, I just want to mention that name again because he's taught me so much about rangeland management. The great Ken Brower, who's taught me a lot, calls George Werthner
I'm having him on Thursday, by the way, everybody.
Wow, fantastic. You want to plug that now and again later? But he's a really, as Ken Brower calls him, an editorial machine, a prolific writer. Whenever I think I know a little bit, I listen to George and I realize how little I know, but I am good at recognizing someone like that, or Julie Phillips coming on soon, a Tule elk biologist who's been in the field 30 years. And I bring them, to cameras, and you talk to the people, great sources of information. I learned so much, and I fear that they won't be around in 50 years, or for that matter, will I? So there are no free ranging herds. They're all bordering ranches still, which are polluting the land and contaminating the water with excessive manure. And I don't believe there's any such thing, this is my opinion now, as wildlife friendly fencing. There is fencing that is less harmful to wildlife, and I'm all for it. But rusty barbed wire, which is in 100-mile lengths out at Point Reyes Seashore, is not wildlife friendly. An animal can get grazed by that and get wounded or infected, or jump over a fence sloppily and get their back legs caught up, and they lift one wire over the other, they get hung up, trapped in the wires, and we've seen pictures of this. And
I can tell you from personal
fences don't belong in national parks. Fences don't belong.
It's also not human friendly. I can tell you from personal experience. These people are sloppy. They just leave discarded barbed wire all over the place out there. So if you're out hiking, watch out. You might get entangled. And I can only imagine how many corpses and bones that I found out there found their eventual demise via entanglement. I also would like to greet some people, acknowledge, I appreciate you people tuning in. Hello, Sledge. You're a regular viewer. I appreciate that. Forever Rock and Roll. Thank you for your continued dedication. Thank you for watching. Low Raw, whole food, plant-based for the environment, and health vegan for the victims. Thank you, Low Raw, for being here. Leah Wilborn, she came and went already, but hello to you. I'm sorry I missed you. In Point, just say, not just the cattle industry, in Point Reyes, more specifically, the dairy industry. Please replace cattle with dairy and meat. I don't know. I don't think that's what she meant to type. Or I didn't read it correctly, because she does not partake in dairy or meat. Replace dairy and meat with
Kathy Cullen is here, who's an elktivist, an activist, and has an animal sanctuary in Occidental. Kathy, would you please, forgive me, type the name of your sanctuary if you'd like a plug for it, just
Hello,
to mention
Kathy.
it. And
hello,
Elizabeth Dodge. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. Elizabeth asked wisely, how do we see Skylar's Thursday program? Where do they go to always see your next podcast, whether it's this one or your own?
Well, if you're able to find this one, then you are on my YouTube channel, and explore under the live tab, and it will be the show right adjacent to this one.
And your YouTube channel is
Watching Humans.
Watching Humans. So if anybody goes to YouTube and says Skylar Thomas Watching Humans, they'll find you.
Yeah, if you Google Skylar Thomas Watching Humans, that should show up. And Anushka Drescher, hi.
Oh, wonderful. Another elktivist.
Where can you see the FOIA documents? Well, I'll tell you where you can see some of them. Some of the original ones that the Center for Biological Diversity hosts on their website are ones that I have taken and done commentary on. I have a bunch of them on my website in which I shared with people exactly what's wrong. But I want to use this as an opportunity to tell you that the Park Service, amazingly and illegally, has still not provided new FOIA request documents. I mean, that's a whole nother topic in itself. They are defying the law by not wanting to expose what's going on out there.
In line with that, a woman, I don't know, Karen Lease, L-E-A-S-E, if I may, I hope, good God, you should say if I should say your name or not, but I think there's enough of us now. My God, we're the majority. Says, what about a CEQA lawsuit for the well-documented water contamination? Like, sure.
Jeez. I mean, the list is huge, right?
The list of offenses
is crazy.
The list of offenses by the cattle industry is longer than their list of lies about how wonderful and historic and contributing, stewards, or as we say, stewards of the land they are. It really is stunning. You don't know where to start.
Well, I'm going to go darker than you, as I usually do. How terrible is the effort to cover up for them? Like the county with the water thing. And the
county, state, and federal. They're polluting water in all three jurisdictions, if you will, and no one was holding them accountable until activists took the mantle and did our own water testing, publicized those thanks to still a free press, and that's how it works these days. But it's, it's the Margaret Mead thing. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing it ever has.
Connie Thorman, thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that you're here. Hey, everybody, I'm going to put the link up right now to Thursday's show. We're going to be talking about Autobahn, which will be heated for some of you. There have been some less than inspiring things going on, but I'll save that for then. But I just put the link up. I'm called host. There's an R next to it. I need to modify that if I can. This is the Thursday show. We're just about to have Julie Phillips come on.
We're trying to do, I wanted to do 30 minutes of us, and I haven't even finished the good news, which is going to throw you back on your heels.
Okay.
And a quick shout out to Kathy Cullen of Jolene's Retreat in Occidental, California, a small animal retreat. All money you donate to her goes directly to her saving animals in, what is that, northern, God, I even know, is Occidental is Sonoma County, right?
That's Kathy. That's Kathy Cullen.
Kathy Cullen. Jolene's Retreat.
Type in your link, Kathy, and I'll put it on the screen.
Great. So let me get to the continuing the good news. So the On Monday, to recap for those who are joining us now, last Monday, Park Service announces a final decision to remove the fence and free the Tule elk herd, the one of the three herds, the largest herd inside the reserve at Point Reyes, Tomales Point. Tuesday, right away, the Park Service, clearly, in my opinion, showing that they really want to do this, starts taking the fence down, because Wednesday, indeed, the cattle empire strikes back. And that was the big, powerful, well-heeled lobbyist group, the California Cattlemen's Association, files a motion in SF District Court for a TRO, a temporary restraining order. You stop that fence work. How dare you let wild elk run free in a national park and have a few more elk walk around our lands, which, of course, the cattlemen in the park don't own, they're renting. So on Friday, there was a hearing, and both sides, which is now the Park Service against the Cattlemen's Association, the Park Service represented by the U.S. Attorney's Office, came to an agreement. A stipulation is my understanding of the legal terminology as best I can sponge it. And they said, okay, we will stop work. We're going to have a hearing in the future about this in detail. We're both going to submit briefs for the court to decide on. But in the meantime, you will stop work. You will not take down any more fence, nor, though, both sides agreed, under the court supervision, will they put back the 850-foot long opening that has been cutting the 8-foot tall fence posts and taking out the woven wire enclosure. There is a huge gap now, a quarter mile in a 2.2 or to 3 mile long fence that allows, finally, after 46 years, elk in the reserve to wander south of the reserve and then back in or anywhere else they want to go. It's great news. And I'll even put a positive spin on this. The hearing now isn't scheduled. The next thing in that case, the cattleman's case of 3 lawsuits, isn't until February 13th. So the elk have free movement now, freer than they have in 46 years for the next 2 months. It's a good thing. And even one more tidbit, suck on this, Skylar. Tell me how this is bad. They were going to take out the water tanks and the water troughs so they couldn't refill them, which we didn't want. Leave them in there, because what if there's a drought next year? They're not going to do that now.
Oh, really?
They're sitting there still. Now, we don't know what's going to happen after February.
Are they going to put anything in them?
Well, of course not. And wise guy, they don't need to. This is the rainy season. The elk desperately need water, and they shouldn't be pet animals anyway, fed in troughs behind a fence. That's the whole point. It should be rewilded, but we want that to be a gradual process, knowing that the elk have become habituated. And it's going to take some amount of time. And I'm very excited when we have Julie on here in just a few minutes to have her opinion about what's going to happen. I know she's super excited after studying elk for 30 years in the field. She's never seen anything like this, where you have a captive herd released. What will the behavior be? And one of the things we'll discuss with her is how do we get, some graduate student class to study the whole phenomenon that's out there. So at the moment, good news. The elk are free in the reserve. There are still problems with the cattle industry being in there. That's an ongoing issue. But compared to 2 weeks ago, I'm actually slowly adjusting to, oh my God, this is a great situation. The Tule elk in the herd that we've been monitoring for years now, and you've been videoing and photographing dead and dying and suffering and starving, that is going to ease. And this is the winter season where they have water anyway.
With, of course, the obvious concern being that they're walking right into the enemy's hands. These are people that have been adamant that they don't want the elk there and that have never faced consequences for breaking the rules.
We are toying with, by the way, don't tell anyone. This is just between you and me, Skylar. Okay? Just shh. We're talking about organizing a large community, I don't know what to call it, a community watch, an elk watch, where we'd take turns on a sign-up sheet, and we would go out there in the park at night. It's open 24/7, and just hang out with the elk in the dark at night. Sit in a chair and bundle up, with a scarf, and just make sure that no one's out there with an ATV late at night on a ranch land, which you can see in the distance because it's all, destroyed forest and coastal scrub. And just make sure there's no shenanigans out there. We could take turns and do a sign-up list. So there's talk about that. We'll see what happens.
That sounds great. That sounds next to impossible to accomplish. But if you do it, amazing.
Okay, but don't tell anybody. That's just between us. It's a secret.
Yeah. Who's this? The elk are not treated like abused pets. They are zoo animals trapped in an unmanned zoo.
Who is that? Yeah, cool. Fair enough.
which is abuse.
Yeah. In any case, it ain't good. And so, let's see. Anything else to just report? I guess. Look at this. Look at this. Is this incredible? You said it couldn't be done. It's only we're not even 30 minutes into the show, and we haven't brought Julie on, so we have plenty of time for her, which is great. Yeah. I mean that's the quick wrap up. I guess I can.
You think I thought we couldn't talk for 30 minutes? I just want to make sure that we take full advantage of Julie, because I haven't gotten to speak to Julie in quite some time myself.
Bring her on. Let's keep the show moving, baby.
All right, everybody. The moment that you waited for, those of you who tuned out, Julie is coming on right now.
So tune back in. Our mouths are done, and we'll give Julie some airtime here.
Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Julie Phillips, biologist and studier of elk in the field, with a wonderful man, Stu, at your side oftentimes for over 30 years, right?
Yes.
So what's your top line? What's your reaction to what's going on out here at Point Reyes?
I think I'm stunned by it. This is the first time we've really seen something quite this historic, but I'm also worried because I've seen a couple of herds where these are the case and then good things don't happen. So I'm excited. I'm really proud of the National Park Service for doing this, but we'll see what they do in the next phase that you're saying so well.
Julia, recently I got some activity on my channel, and a lot of people said things like why don't you consult the California Fish and Wildlife, and California Fish and Wildlife would know what to do. And also someone even said that, oh, they hate hunters in California, which is interesting because I see hunters every day. I'm not even exaggerating. Every day.
You're not in Marin County.
Well, okay. So California is an agricultural state, and I happen to consider that to be not the most wildlife friendly sign. But anyway, Julie, I'm going to steal the thunder and tell people that some of the herds that you observed over the years have disappeared under the watch of California Fish and Wildlife. Should I start there, or should we circle back to that?
I think it's a good starting point.
Okay.
I think it's important for people to understand that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which used to be the California Department of Fish and Game, of which I worked under contract with to follow the reintroduction of Tule many years ago. So the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has the legal jurisdiction to oversee the herds in general. But in the case of places like Point Reyes, they defer to the National Park Service. And I think this is a really important part. So when some of us have complained to them about what's going on, and there's been letters sent and so on, they say, oh, I'm sorry, that's under the jurisdiction. We defer to them in this particular case. So with that said, many of us have complained to past governor offices, state elected officials, because we think our state agency, which is our wildlife agency, should have that oversight responsibility, which they don't. And also I've had California Department of Fish and Wildlife biologists, remember, say to me that hunting is a moneymaker for the state of California. So here are the people that are actually have the job of overseeing our wildlife population, the hunting. When I kept saying we should stop hunting the elk, and we'll talk more about this, I hope, because of its impacts on their genetic health, they say, oh, there's plenty of elk and hunting is a good thing.
So genetic health, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Genetic health. My understanding is there are approximately 702 is the last count of the Park Service does an annual count of the total of the three herds at Point Reyes Seashore. The largest herd is about half that inside the reserve. Now there's going to be more mingling of the three herds, which is good for genetic diversity, animals mating with other animals from other places. But all of the animals at Point Reyes Seashore, correct me if I'm wrong, are from just 10 elk brought up from Bakersfield in 1978, which started this reserve in the first place. Is that correct?
It's a bottleneck source.
Yep. Say again, Skylar?
It's a bottleneck source.
Genetic bottleneck. And Julie,
they're basically captive herds because, and most of the herds in California are genetically isolated is the term we use. And that's been the problem. So we've been arguing, let's open up wildlife corridors, which is going to be a great challenge between these herds. So they are genetically isolated. They already went through a population bottleneck, the Tule elk. So they went from 500,000 elk to maybe less than a few thousand. over the years. So they went through a population bottleneck. So they lost a lot of what we call gene alleles, that diversity within the gene pool. And so we kept saying, you got to get them free roaming. We've got to let those herds be connected. We've been arguing this for years. And again, the state agency has not worried. They said they're fine. They're doing great. And, you know, I don't agree.
And let me run this by you. I've been saying this, and you and I have spoken in the past. Obviously, Julie, you've been a really great help of providing information to people like me who are, newbies to it and generalists. But the herds would benefit from mingling in different areas to increase genetic diversity. Correct?
Yes.
You know what? God, my brain. I forgot my point. I'll come back. Skylar, take it.
They shouldn't be genetically isolated. And again, remember that hunting, as I mentioned earlier, is a big thing in California, especially with elk herds, including the Tule elk. And so hunters don't kill the weak and the sick.
Right.
Who do hunters kill? The biggest bulls.
It's concerning that you have a biologist who is talking about money instead of the well-being of an animal. Oh, generating money, which I happen to think is kind of what Fish and Wildlife is all about. It's generating money and continuing the cycle of hunters being able to kill, instead of us standing back and saying, hey, let's see what wildlife can do if we ever leave them alone. And we said on a previous episode, whenever humans want to manage something, they say that there's plenty of it. But we don't ever cut back on the human population or the cattle population, et cetera, et cetera. There's never enough of that. But there's always plenty of whatever we happen to want an excuse to kill. And the last thing Julie said, we've really got to emphasize the fact that people and hunters love to talk about this stuff, talk about managing populations and pretending like they're predators. They don't behave like predators. They don't do what predators do. They weaken the gene pool instead of strengthening the gene pool, which you would think that they would understand that. And maybe they do, and they just don't care, because call it what it is. It's trophy hunting. It's making yourself feel like you accomplished something by sighting something up in a scope and ending its life and mounting the antlers.
So if I may, Julie, I remember my question now. It was about, there is criticisms often that, oh no, if we set the elk free and if we remove the ranches out, which is what we all are pushing for because they, harm the national park, land and water and air, then the elk will overpopulate. And I think it was in talking to you that it was, no, quite the opposite. The population will grow, hopefully, and swell, and then subherds could be, as was transported into the park in the first place, the herds could be, if we get up into the thousands of numbers, 5 or 10 or 15 years from now, you could take subherds and move them to other areas of the state that would benefit from the reintroduction of these native fauna, correct?
Especially putting in places where they've been lost. So Carrizo Plains National Monument, one of the original sites I studied the elk.
Where is that? Where is that?
That's down Southern California. Let's see, what county that in? That's in San Luis Obispo County. Okay. So Carrizo Plains National Monument is huge. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just consider the umbrella mentality. Consider what you two just mentioned. It's like, listen, why are you so concerned that the elk might do well? Use that as a positive. The elk are going to do well in Point Reyes, and if they do too well, let's continue to use that as a positive. Stop acting like your only option is to kill them off. Take them to all these places that they are missing. Or how about all these people that are pretending like they're behind regenerative ranching because of the importance of replacing grazing animals that we've lost? Well, how about you return the native grazing animals instead of pretending cattle are your only option? We have, it's like a nursery, like a native plant nursery for elk in Point Reyes National Seashore that we could keep spreading if humans were ever to actually embrace nature. But we want to keep it under control and keep the population managed.
And that's the field we now see growing. Landscape and restoration ecology are huge. They're being taught in many colleges and universities now. So the whole field of restoration ecology, that happens with restoring those native populations, including Tule elk. So Tule elk are critical for restoring the native landscape. They get rid of the weeds and that kind of stuff because they actually help carry and, encourage things like native bunch grasses, perennial grasses, our native shrubs. So Tule elk help restore it. And we've seen that in places where the cattle were removed and the Tule elk were brought in, the natural in one place we studied, a couple places, we actually saw the native landscape restore. It's pretty incredible. And then in one place, the Tule elk, they removed the Tule elk, brought the cattle back in, it was destroyed in a matter of 2 months.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think I said this last week, Jack. I think that they're afraid for there to be visual evidence of how elk will restore the seashore compared to how cattle destroy it. People are saying that they are having trouble hearing me. Are you guys experiencing that?
No. Yeah, I saw Anushka said you're cutting out, but it sounds fine. Skyward keeps cutting out. Thank you for bringing a Tule elk expert. So much science and historical information from Anushka as well. There's a whole conversation going on here in the chat about, drone monitoring and which are illegal in the park. And it's a separate show we'll do if we want to try to do an elk watch, to have people socialize and build community and keep an eye on things out there, which I think would be a great idea if it's done legally. And now we can partner with the Park Service again, because they've really shifted their policy. And I see absolutely them as an ally. There's a new superintendent in town, Ann Altman, who I'd love to have a conversation with at some point and support them. I'm actually working on a release for In Defense of Animals, whom I do consulting work for, to write letters of praise to the Park Service. We need to keep educating the public, as this community group does, as all of us do together, and teach people about, the hazards of how hard on the land cattle are, how, as Julie is saying and explaining, elk heal the land. And absolutely right, Skylar, we should see this as a wonderful elk nursery, a Tule elk nursery, where we spread this wonderful native animal that operates completely differently, as we were talking in our regenerative ranching show, which is a bunch of BS, literally and figuratively.
I think it's really important too for people in the audience to understand is the genetic health of the Tule elk is a concern. Now, California Department of Fish and Wildlife will argue this point, but we have to be concerned because with climate change, how will these elk be able to adapt? And we don't know that. And so they say, oh, they're fine, they do great. Well, we don't know that because through hunting, the isolation, there's not this movement between the different populations. We could be losing genetic alleles that are essential in allowing them to adapt to climate change over time. And this has been the thing we've argued. We need to connect these herds. We need to really look at hunting because, again, hunting, it causes the evolution of the weak and sick. And we got to keep saying that.
Here's a question for you, Julie. Are Tule elk a protected species under the the ESA or not? Or they're threatened and endangered? We talk about that. They're listing in some of the politics.
They have no protection in the state of California. So we argue that they should have some legal protection as a protected species. Or we tried to get them listed as a state mammal. We've been to the state legislature. We've been to elected officials. We think they need some special designation. I keep proposing, I think they should become our state mammal. The grizzly bear is our state mammal. It's extinct. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassment. We need to have an animal that is so incredible, like the Tule elk, as our state mammal. And again, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife will argue every time, no, we're not going to give them any protection status because they're doing just fine. Well, they don't know that. They're not out there in the field. I mean, go to Criso Plains, you can't find a single elk. Go up to Santa Clara County, where I studied them originally on some of the ranches there, they're totally gone. There's no elk in many of these locations. And in fact, that's been some of the, I guess, good positive side somewhat of the captive herds that are somewhat protected because they're still there. Sometimes you can't find the elk.
Let me stop you guys for a second because I don't want anyone to miss what you're saying. Some people are saying that refreshing their browser brought back the audio. So if anyone is actually having that problem, 2 people have typed in that refreshing the feed solved it. So it's on your ends. It doesn't appear to be on our ends.
Beautiful. And thank you, Eric Allen, for writing that in. Yeah, I refreshed the page and the audio fixed itself. So if you have trouble hearing, I'm just repeating what Skylar said, refresh your browser, and that should help with the restream feed here. So, I'm, as a self-appointed activist, environmental activist and advocate who likes to bring people together, or Skylar actually created this show by inviting me on, and we're doing more of these. It's information, educating the public, as Julie knows, who went on to become an educator now and teaching kids. And I think we can get a listing for Tule elk, if that's the thing to do, by just talking about it and educating people that, or re-educating them, that cattle are not good in the land. They are a destructive, as Ken Brower taught me, extractive industry that do harm to the land, bring in the weeds, which is to say non-native grasses that then become a fire hazard, that then the cattle industry says the fix for the fire likely grasses is to have more cattle graze, when the cattle are what brought in the grass that burns and is considered a fire danger in the first place. So once again, the cattle industry is a kind of a pox on the land. And then when there's symptoms of how bad the disease is, they say, well, the fix is more of the same disease, cattle. And the fix is getting the cattle out. And in my opinion, Julie, is one of the areas you and I might have some, well, we're fans of each other, but I fear the word restoration a lot because it always gets to be supercharged by capitalism, and people want to bring in chemicals and kill things versus just get humans out and let a place go wild. Humans don't need, in my opinion, and I'm not a biologist, so I want your reaction to this. You know, it's sort of leave the Tule elk alone and they'll do just fine. You know, it's not, we need to be actively managing with hunting or with, you know, cultural burns and all these other things where it's humans saying, gee, how will the planet survive without us, when it survived fine for millions of years before we showed up and industrialized and are doing what we're doing now, which is ravaging the planet by including management.
Great points. And I think one thing that's important for people to separate out at this point is let's look at private lands versus public lands. So what ranchers and others do on their private land is under some other Department of Agriculture, some other jurisdiction. But when we're talking about public lands, that's different. That is owned by the public. And in this case, the national park system are the most protected lands on earth. They were called restricted use lands. This national park system, which Point Reyes National Seashore is a part of, these belong to the public and need to be managed with nature in mind. They're not managed for cattle. The fact they have cattle in a national park violates the true mission of a national park and has it for decades and decades. So now we're at a point where we have an opportunity to have a conversation about what should happen on our public lands. And so the Tule elk will be instrumental in those areas in California where there's public lands like Carrizo Plains National Monument to restore those populations so that they can help in the long-term restoration of those lands, which are severely degraded. I mean, Carrizo Plains National Monument used to be beautiful, and to study the elk there was incredible. When the elk were basically removed, and nobody admits to what happened, but we went back and looked at it, we couldn't find a single elk in Carrizo Plains National Monument. So those elk were probably what we call shoot, shovel, and shut up, 3 S's. So that's what happens at night, and that's one of my concerns at Point Reyes as well. So this is what happens when you release elk herds. Who's out there protecting them? And basically, I had to be careful out there in the field because I was nervous about my own health and safety.
I mean, how many predators are allowed in California to have possibly been the source of the elk going missing? You know,
absolutely. We need to bring the wolves back. We need to, especially in Northern California, allow the native wolves to come back, which is a primary predator of elk. And that, I mean, there's big discussions. Oregon's going through this right now. California needs to be part of that. So again, the elk and the wolves, all those things are part of the natural landscape, especially on public lands.
And I'll ask everybody who in the back of their minds is defending the ranchers as wildlife friendly, who do you think doesn't want wolves here? There's only one group of people that don't want the wolves here. Wolves aren't breaking into people's homes and threatening lives. You know, there's one group, and they continue to be the group that is anti-wildlife, whether it's herbivores or predators. And they're dangerous to humans too. Julie, you said that you felt threatened. Boy, I would sure like to go be one of those grad students that studies the restoration progress of the Tule elk in Point Reyes, but I would imagine that I would get picked off with a sniper rifle.
If anybody, by the way, listening to the show, or this show is going to be recorded, and Skyward puts it later on his YouTube page for podcasts or recordings, I would love to find, and I think, Julie, you were mentioning this, you would love to find a college, university that would have a graduate program to study what's happening at Point Reyes with the rewilding, or the more wilding anyway, of the Tule elk there, right? We want that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Stanford, UC San Francisco. I mean, there's a lot of cool places up there. I had some Stanford students that wanted to restore Tule elk to the Stanford campus, which was kind of complex. So I went up there, we met with them and talked about it. But my concerns was the size of the land. It was big because the Tule elk home range is huge. So, but there's a lot of students now in college that are interested. And when I did my work teaching at De Anza Community College, and I taught a class on Tule elk, the students loved it. And most of the reaction to the students taking the class was, we didn't even know there were elk in our state. It was always shocking that they had no idea. And so our environmental studies program made this important part of our outreach. is taking students out so they could reconnect, and it was life-changing for many students. Many went into the field eventually to study environmental science and wildlife and so on. So most people don't even know the elk exist. And that's who I think is responsible. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife has done a terrible job on educating the public, because again, they support this other industry that is not about education.
I'm frothing at the mouth. This whole Point Reyes thing caused me to learn ecology, and I turned into an ecology nerd. And I do some of my own observations and restoration work. And you watch the tiniest little detail about something responding to something positive that you did. And it's just, it allows you to ask a question. It's like, wait a minute, why did that do that? And what's going to respond to that one doing that? And you could just have a never ending chain of that happening in Point Reyes National Seashore, seeing nature return because you're allowing natural animals to be there. What an incredible opportunity. You would think that the state would be foaming at the mouth. You'd think that biologists and wildlife enthusiasts would be foaming at the mouth, instead of saying, oh, but the poor ranchers, as if the entire freaking state isn't agriculture.
By the way,
we're talking about public lands too. So again, we're talking about public lands that belong to us. And I had an amazing professor at San Jose State, Dr. Michael Kudelet, who, I was a woman in the early 80s, and I told him I wanted to study wildlife. And he said, well, how about elk? And I had no idea. You guys have heard this story. I had no idea what an elk was. And he invested in me going out in the 80s as a woman studying Tule elk, which was pretty incredible. And again, that work was so essential. And again, others, then once we did that project, we went out to other areas. That was in Santa Clara County, and then we went to other areas. And again, that whole concept of studying the elk came out of San Jose State University. And they went to a contract with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. There was a whole movement to begin to study them. Since that time, we haven't seen much. And someone mentioned online, Sonoma State or College of Marin, those would be fabulous to do this kind of stuff, especially Sonoma State that would do research, would have grad students.
So someone has to take that on and make those calls and suggest. And I mean, it's just, it's another effort. That's all.
I wonder if any of those people at San Jose State are still there, or if they would have died by now or retired.
No longer there, yeah. Yeah.
Do you guys want to take any callers, or should I put the link up just in case?
Well, we got 9 minutes to go here. Gosh.
Julie, do you want to talk about the, I already, I teased about it and we didn't talk about it yet. Do you want to talk about your concern about the low population, the low reproductive rate of the free herds?
At Point Reyes Seashore. I
think that you had a captive herd, which has been basically inbreeding. And so now it's exciting. But again, even those three herds are isolated from the other herds. So that's a big worry. So again, what's so big right now is the field of wildlife ecology and wildlife corridors, landscape ecology. And so now we need to take our map of California and begin to push the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to begin to provide connectivity between herds, not just for Tule elk, but for all the other wildlife. So this is a moment in history, the year is 2024. This field's been out there for a while. We need to actually look at wild populations. Tule elk would be the perfect start. So how do we connect these herds? There's places where we could do that. And how do we create wildlife corridors?
So you're talking about the importance of these elk getting outside of Point Reyes National Seashore. And I just have to tell you that Melanie Gunn of the Point Reyes National Seashore told me point blank, they will never let the elk out of Point Reyes National Seashore and will kill them even if the ranchers and the fence are gone. Our park staff are not motivated to increase nature for some strange reason. And
So let's go back to our original role. So that was bad cop. And, you know, I can't disagree with what you said, but I'm going to play good cop and say, I choose of my own volition to see the National Park Service now as our future ally who wants to do the right thing for wildlife and can be encouraged and supported to do the right thing.
So let me give you some damning evidence in what they released, stating with why they decided to let the elk out. They also said that they would manage them in accordance with the partnership of Grattan Rancheria, in accordance to California Fish and Wildlife. What we just heard does not mean that that is good. You do not want them managed in accordance with California Fish and Wildlife. That means killing them.
I think that's one of the things that disturbed me about the new partnerships, was that this was just a way for them to be hunted by different people.
Thank you.
I mean, I heard this and I go, we're talking about the same things. And some herds, like Point Reyes, will be a real challenge for connectivity. I understand that. But statewide, we need to really begin to look at this whole picture. And we need a new generation of people come in and take over these agencies, new leadership, new vision. And again, because landscape and restoration ecology are being taught in our schools and colleges now, this is a moment in history we have an opportunity, especially with looming climate change challenges.
How exactly did the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, what was the history and the process to where they ended up being the ones that decided everything and everyone deferred to?
Well, they did. There was a decision made to restore Tule populations, and it came out of some other legal issues we can talk about later. But again, there was a decision made. They became the lead agency, and there was a decision that we want to have these elk. And again, because it was a moneymaker, was the initial thought. You know, because Tule hunting elk was going to be a big moneymaker for the state of California. But there were others in that whole discussion that wanted elk restored to different populations. So again, the original elk herds were getting large; they needed to move them around. So there's a whole history to that.
But how did they become the authority that everyone defers judgment to?
That was just the way the decision was made. They make California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which at that time was Fish and Game, make all the decisions about our native wildlife in the state of California on our public lands that are state owned. Now, national park lands, again, as I mentioned, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, concedes to the National Park Service in this case. And I'm sure like national monuments and that type of thing.
Hey guys,
Jack, I think that Grattan Rancheria are going to use it as an excuse to culturally hunt the elk.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Scott,
no doubt about it, she says. Wow.
Yeah. Well, so this is the call for me, isn't it? It's more people involved, a community that cares, bring people out to the park, have them re-engage with the elk and care. To be out there and see them is to fall in love with them if you're at all an animal person. I have a picture I want to show. I have a picture I want to show of an elk from last Wednesday who walked south of I was there with Matthew and another photographer, and we were watching it happen. May I try to share a screen? Is that an okay thing to try? See if it works?
Yeah.
Okay. Window. Okay, here we go. This should work. Let me know if you're seeing a picture of an... Yes?
There it is.
So that is a bull elk. He is standing right where the fence post used to be, headed south. That's Tamales Bay in the background, standing on Pierce Point Road. People can drive right to the spot where this picture was taken. I'm standing on pavement, for heaven's sake, and see if this works. I'm zooming out. And you can, I better let me zoom in here. To the right side, you can see, actually, it's in the shadow, but there's fence line down there that has not been cut. But from where he's standing, it's about a quarter mile to that fence in the shadow in the middle right side of the picture. That is where there still is fence, but this area now is free for these elk to move up and down. And then once they head south, I don't know. I
got to ask Julie a question while we have her here about the elk's reaction, because the elk, humans were there doing their noisy deconstructing of the fence, which you would think would be kind of alarming to wildlife. And yet they crossed over that boundary in a short period of time. And to me, that says, man, they have been itching to get out. Otherwise, wouldn't they be alarmed a little bit by all the human activity there and all the noise? I mean,
I was shocked. I was shocked when you guys reported that, Matthew and Jack. I was shocked that they went over that fast. I thought they'd stay back for a while, but haven't you guys seen them constantly walking along that fence line over the years?
Oh, yeah.
They were just waiting for this to happen. They knew this was going to happen or something.
When I arrived there on Wednesday for an interview with Dan Noyes TV, when he was about ready to leave, I saw oh, look, there's a Tule elk kind of up on the hill in the distance, looking at us, looking right at us, and just standing there looking at us, curious. And I realized, you taught me this, Julie, is go in the field and be quiet and look, and this, Skyward, and you learn. So he's looking at us, curious, obviously curious. We're on the roadway where the elk there are accustomed to humans being. We backed off the grass where he would be. And over the next 30 minutes, he slowly worked his way down. And then I saw 2 more elk behind him. So it was 3 bull Tule elk. And we hung out there for, I don't know, it was total about an hour until this guy that I just showed you and 2 others just felt it out, sniffing and obviously assessing, because they're highly intelligent, sensitive animals, more than most humans, of course, that, oh yeah, this is different now. And I'm going to walk gingerly. And then they just walked.
I saw Matthew's footage, who captured just about the entire sequence, and the expression in the elk's face looking around like, can I really finally cross this? Is this a trick?
And remember, one thing that's key here is that it's the rut season. Those poor subordinate bulls. So here's the main dominant bulls chasing them around within that small enclosure. I mean, they literally probably get killed once in a while. I'm sure they get, by the other, those dominant bulls. So these subordinate bulls were waiting for that moment because they feel all the energy, the hormones that's going on in the main herd. I mean, I had to climb up a tree one time because I was chased by a bull that was rutting. I mean, they are very aggressive. So that was kind of my first thought, is those bulls are getting the H out of there because they feel that sense. How interesting what you just said. Just another dynamic of these animals that I think a lot of people haven't thought of. The non-dominant males need to get away from the dominant males. Oh, yeah, they'll chase them down. I mean, there's kind of the dominant. There's always between the dominant bulls. There's always this battle going on. And so again, I had to be very careful in the field during that rut season, especially at night when I was out. I mean, literally, they would run into him and they noticed who you were. But again, they're very aggressive. That was my first thought. They're going, you guys have opened the fence for me. I'm out of here.
Wow.
So, I mean, what you did was historic, fighting in that effort to get that fence down.
Well, it's a huge community. I mean, maybe that's the best way to wrap up here at 10 o'clock, 1 hour in, but it's a huge community of people. I mean, there's some people that are more visible, and I've got a big mouth and I like to be more visible. I've gotten used to that, but it's so many people been working on this for so many years. And my God, Julie, I mean, you're always gushing about, thankful for us, but without your research and without your caring and without your educating people, we couldn't do what we do. This is beautiful, beautiful community. Eric Allen, just an activist I know, he's just said, I have photos of some excited elk crossing over from yesterday, meaning he was out there at the park. And anybody listening to this anywhere can drive. Drive to Point Reyes Seashore, an hour and a half from San Francisco, and see these guys tonight. It's drive-in Tule elk. That's the good news about elk being in a tiny little area, is us humans get to actually see them and enjoy them and get a little taste of wild in our lives. Which
see them before. Can I make one last statement? I just wanted to say that all you as leaders and the whole team that's working with us and the different environmental team groups, what you have done has been historic. There has never been anything like this in the state of California on behalf of our native Tule elk. So what happened is just absolutely amazing, because now it may lead to some things happening in other places as well. So thank you so much, all of you that have been involved at so many different levels.
And the people had to make it happen. It's important for people to understand. They had to be shamed and sued into doing what was meant to be done, and we still haven't quite accomplished it. People, get out there and see those elk before they end up on rancher dinner plates.
Ending on a positive note, Skylar, way to go. Anushka had a great question. She said, how can people get involved? And the simplest answer to that right now is sign up for Skylar's newsletter and emails. Go to his Watching Humans page on YouTube. For me, it's treespiritproject.com. If you want to contact me, my email is on that website, jack@treespiritproject.com. And we'll put you on our list and keep you up to date on what's going on in the park when there is an action, or if we decide we do want to get a community watch group together. It's to get engaged. And it's not, as opposed to, I guess I would encourage you to think, instead of like, oh no, it's one more thing to do, it's something outdoors, away from Netflix, in nature, with wild animals. And if you're an animal person like we three all obviously are, and Julie's made a profession of it, it's a plus in your life. It's something wonderful to do to connect you back to nature, from which we humans are so disconnected, tragically so, and enrich your life day to day. So there's my pitch for joining this group of elktivists and national park fans.
And hello to Liz Dodge from me. Good to see you on here. Anushka, I said hi. Eric, thank you all. Obviously, Derek has provided some amazing footage that I think I shared with Julie of frustrated males at the fence trying to get through to battle with other elk, and there's a fence standing in between them. More of the habitat fragmentation problems, which if you tune back in on Thursday, I'll be talking about with George Worthner. But thank you everybody who tuned into the show and that have been supporting this. And most of my Point Reyes stuff I have on the shameofpointreyes.org website. The Watching Humans is what I named my YouTube channel because I cover all kinds of stuff, but Point Reyes is pretty dominant right now. Don F. Been following this after watching Skylar's doc. You guys are doing great. Thank you, Don F. Cinnamon. Jack, you want to read one?
Yeah, please. Eric Allen says, what's the sentiment for activists to finish tearing down the fence? Fair question. I understand the sentiment, but please do not. Right now, the elk have access to being out. Tearing down more of the fence would be monstrously, in my humble opinion, as an activist who wants to tear down the fence, monstrously counterproductive. Please don't do that now. I'll ask anybody who works with me. I talk strategy to death, and I think that's a really disastrous strategy. So do not do that. I couldn't be more clear. There's talk about drones flying for monitoring. Drones are illegal in a national park, and I can't say that I haven't thought about it, but they are noisemakers. They're hazards to the raptors that fly around there, the hawks and such. And there's no need to do that right now. I would think someone else suggested earlier, I forget who it was, I can't credit you, going in at night with night vision goggles and scopes from the roadways to watch what's going on at ranches and with the elk. That's fine. That's legal. It's not disturbing the wildlife. I really want to be, and even when you drive in there, drive slowly and just enjoy the place rather than barrel through it and bring the city energy to these few wild places we have.
Yeah, people speed through there. It makes me very sad.
And can I just add one more thing? And it's really important that this is hopefully our state mammal. It's important to work with the National Park Service. It's also important to work with the state officials. We have to give the elk more status at the state level so they can be protected, not just at Point Reyes, but other locations throughout the state, because it's kind of the silence about the elk is really what's causing the serious problems. The more that people learn, the more you put the word out, share it. Facebook, Instagram, go to the different sites. You can also get if you'd like one of my Tule elk guides on my naturebasedteaching.com. You can go there and you can download for free my guide.
Wait, slow down. Naturebasedteaching.com.
I'll put it up.
Thank you, Skylar.
And there's my free Tule elk guides. They're all free now. Just download one and spread the word, not about just Point Reyes, which is essential, but also about all the other herds that need our protection.
Naturebasedteaching.com. This is Julie Phillips, Tule elk biologist extraordinaire, who's been so wonderfully helpful in getting us youngsters going on this project. Thank you, Julie.
I have an ending note. This is interesting. I got a call this morning. The Berkeley Hillside Club is screening The Shame of Point Reyes on December 18th. And just found out today that they have been threatened by the ranchers, just like they did the first time The Shame of Point Reyes was screened. These people do not want the truth coming out. But isn't that interesting? These good people with all of their violence. But if anyone wants to go there and have my back, because I am going to attend the screening.
And how much were they paid for their leases to be bought out? In today's dollars, $350 million.
So, Julie, there's that final can of worms. So if anybody listening is pro-rancher listening to this recording, the ranchers were paid millions of dollars, the equivalent of $350 million over
1987.
Over several years through the 1960s and 1970s. They were paid to leave. And as I sum it up, and then they reneged on the deal. They took the money and didn't leave and played politics ever since, getting lease extensions. And now they say, oh, we belong here. We've always been part of the park. We were supposed to be here. That is, to put it gently, BS.
And they should repay that money to us, right? Shouldn't they repay that money that they were paid?
Well, you got to choose your battles, my dear, of course. And as some people are saying now with the Nature Conservancy in what I call the Three Orgs lawsuit, apparently offering, the rumor is, they'll pay $10 million more to the ranchers to get them out, and that's disgusting, and they shouldn't be paid twice. And the pragmatist among this group of activists is whatever it takes, get them the heck out. And even that, they're still not willing to take that. The ranchers are still, as I call it, the cattle empire is striking back with disinformation, misinformation, outright lies about how they should be in the park and we're always supposed to be there. It's not true. They're the major destructive force in the park, and they've got to go. They cannot live side by side with wild animals.
I have a unreleased portion of a documentary that actually shows in the timeline the ranchers purchasing parcels outside of the park immediately following receiving payment. They were supposed to use that money to transition. They got other land, and then they stayed and have continued there at a fraction of what the lease rate should be, while being subsidized by the American taxpayer and hurting nature. And people want to say that we have to help those people. You really got to get that out of your heads. These people don't need help. They have more money than you can dream of.
They run a propaganda machine, and the Cattlemen's Association is doing it now, claiming that, you know, a few elk wandering around the place are going to ruin the businesses that shouldn't be there in the first place. It's nonsense, but people need to get the truth out. So people, if you watch this as a recording, please share it and go visit the park. There was someone wrote, there was a Point Reyes princess, someone who loves going out there and seeing the ranches and was appreciative. And I appreciate you tuning in. Please share this. Point Reyes princess, whoever you are.
Do we know you by another name? Send it in the messages. But
National Parks Princess. I spend a great deal of time in the park because of elk and wildlife. This has been a very informative show. Well, thank you, and please share it. And if you want to identify yourself, fine. And if you don't, we understand.
And not only do we not need to keep paying the ranchers, they need to pay reparations. That's what my stance. They need to pay reparations. Julie, it was such a pleasure to have you. I would ask you ecology questions all day if I could, but I hope I get to see you soon. And Jack, as usual, thank you for keeping it lively, and thanks for reporting on the hearing and everything that took place. Everyone, I'll be back Thursday if you want to tune in and listen to another expert talk about nature.
And if you want to follow you, Skylar, it's once again Watching Humans on YouTube, or Google that.
Let me put the direct link to the show up, which is easier for people.
And for me, Jack Gescheit of the Tree Spirit Project, it's treespiritproject.com. There's contact page, an elk page, the podcast page, which links to the show. And Julie, once again, if people want to get into contact with you or read your book, it is
naturebasedteaching.com.
naturebasedteaching.com. Thank you again, Julie. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for your leadership. We really appreciate it.